Hello again. This video lecture is on logical fallacies. Let me talk a little bit about what a fallacy is before we get started here. A fallacy is an argument that on the surface looks like it is logical and true if we don't think about the connections between the warrant and the evidence in the claim, or the tests of evidence, or applying some of the concepts that underlie inductive or deductive logic. We might think, oh, this argument is true, and then we are persuaded by it. The dangers of logical fallacies is that too often people hear a fallacy and they treat it as if it's logical argumentation. So our goal in this video lecture is to show you examples of logical fallacies and help you understand how you can either avoid making them yourself or have the skills to be able to recognize a logical fallacy when it's presented to you. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to explain each of those 10 fallacies of argument, and I'm going to give you some examples for those. So the first logical fallacy is what we call the hasty generalization, or when I was in speech and debate, we used to abbreviate this to the hasty G. This is faulty inductive logic. Remember, inductive logic is specific to general. You're generating a list of examples and then generalizing that the entire broad general category must be true. This is faulty argument by example, and more often than not, it violates the tests of sufficiency. It can also violate the test of representation as well. For example, stereotyping is a textbook hasty generalization. We meet two people of a certain sexual orientation or race or religion or even political affiliation, and we decide that everybody that shares those same characteristics must also be the same personality or the same type of person. So we meet a few people who are a particular race, and we decide everybody in that race must be the same way. We also exaggerate a small number of instances and decide that they're representative of a broader range of issues. One of the political arguments that's being made right now is because of the recent pandemic, a lot of politicians want to go to mail-in voting as a national policy. And there are a lot of people who say, no, that is going to make it rife with fraud. And we're going to prove this because there are like 2 instances in the last 50 years where mail-in ballots were discovered to be fraudulent. So therefore, those 2 examples means we can never have mail-in voting. So that's kind of an example of how we exaggerate a small number of instances to turn it into some kind of a broader argument. Let me give you a couple of real-world examples. The first one has to do with this phenomenon. This was like back in 2001. And this was the summer that was dubbed the summer of the shark. And what had happened was in July of 2001, a shark attacked a young 8-year-old boy, Jesse, and he was killed. And this became a huge sensation. People thought, oh, wow, sharks rarely attack. This was in Florida. This was off of Santa Rosa Island in Florida. And then about a week later, there were 2 other attacks in the Bahamas. And this severed the leg of one of the people that the shark attacked. And then a week after that, about 6 miles from where Jesse, the boy in the earlier example was, another shark attack killed someone. And then, this is July, by September, 2 other people had been killed in Virginia and then one in North Carolina. So what had happened was the media became fixated on these shark attacks. And they were out in the water, with microphones. Are you scared to go in the water because of the sharks? I mean, we've had like 6 shark attacks so far. And people started getting really frenzied about this in the media. And here's my example of Time magazine saying, look, it's the summer of the shark. The reality of what made this a faulty or a hasty generalization is that by the end of the summer period, like by the end of September, there had been 76 shark attacks total worldwide. This was less than the 85 attacks that have been documented in the year 2000, just the year before. So there were actually fewer shark attacks in 2001 than 2000, and only 5 people were actually killed by sharks in 2001, but 12 had been killed in 2000. So what they'd done was taken these 6 shark attacks were in like different parts of the country and decided that they came together to create some sort of epidemic. What it violated, one, was the test of sufficiency, but also relevancy. There's, the only way for those 6 shark attacks to be connected was if sharks were somehow communicating with each other and saying, hey, this is the summer, we're going to rise up and attack humans. You take North Carolina, you take Florida, you take the Bahamas. But it was just a random series of attacks that happened within a 6-week period. So here's another example. Earthquakes. In 2010, we had 3 earthquakes occur, one right after another in highly populated areas. One happened in Haiti, then not much later, Chile, and not much after that, Mexico. And all of a sudden, people were panicked. Why are we all of a sudden having all of these earthquakes in populated areas? Are the tectonic plates shifting? Is the moon getting too close to the earth? Is the world coming to an end? And so this became this there's this rash of earthquakes. What's the reason for it? And scientists, seismologists, had to come along and say, hey, hold on, don't panic. Here's the deal. We have over 1 million earthquakes every year on this planet. Most of those earthquakes happen so far below the surface of the earth that no one feels them. A lot of times they happen out in the middle of the ocean. So they might be a 5-point earthquake in the middle of the ocean, but doesn't affect anything. Or they happen in a mountainous area where no one feels them. Coincidentally, these 3 earthquakes out of the 1 million that happen every year just coincidentally happen to happen in populated areas. It's just the law of averages that this is a particular year where 3 major earthquakes happen to take place in these populated areas. It's not that we are having more major earthquakes, it's just that the earthquakes that are major typically happen so far out in the middle of nowhere that no one feels them. So, and again, since then, we haven't had like a rash of earthquakes in populated areas. So here are 2 really good examples of where we have these, hasty, hasty generalizations. The next type, false analogy. This occurs when we try to compare 2 things that we are pretending are similar, but they're really not similar enough to warrant the comparison. In fact, the differences outweigh the similarities. So this hence becomes a false analogy. For example, a medical student might say, look, no one objects to a physician looking up a difficult case in medical books. Why then shouldn't students taking a difficult examination be permitted to use their textbooks? And again, 2 totally different situations. If you're taking an exam, using a textbook doesn't test your knowledge. If I am a doctor, I want my knowledge tested, right? I want to be able to validate that. So it's a false analogy. Another one, failing to tip a waitress is like stealing money out of somebody's wallet. Well, it's really not, because you're not taking money away from a waitress. You're just failing to give her money in the first place versus actually stealing money. One is illegal, the other is not illegal. So a whole lot of differences between this. But this is a good kind of illustration of what a false analogy is. But let me give you a couple of other examples. The first is when we talk about gun control in this country, there are a lot of pro-gun control advocates, people who will argue that we need better gun control in our country. And they will use a graph like this as an example. If we look at all of the industrialized countries and rank them in order of the gun-related deaths that they have. You'll notice up here that the United Kingdom, Japan, and Austria, and Germany, and Spain and Norway, I mean, these top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 countries have almost zero gun-related deaths. Look at the United States. We're at the bottom. We have the most gun-related deaths of any of these industrialized nations. And a lot of people who are pro-gun control will look at this and say, you know, the countries that are at the top of this list and have few gun deaths have really strict gun control laws. Notice us. We don't have very strict gun control laws, and we have this high number of gun deaths. We should be like these other countries. We need stricter gun control. If we follow the lead of these other countries and impose strict gun control, you know, our gun death rates are going to fall. And on the surface, that sounds like a logical analogy, except there's one glaring difference between the United States and any of those countries on that list, and that is we have a constitutional right to bear arms. We have the Second Amendment. In order for us to impose the same kind of gun control that they have in the UK, Japan, France, Italy, Spain, we would have to remove the Second Amendment, and that's not going to happen. So these analogies fail. They fail at that level. All right, so the third fallacy I want to talk about is probably my favorite because it has this cool Latin name. It's called the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy, and you can just consider it the post hoc fallacy. But it's a fallacy of causation. It says that because something happened after the fact, then it must be because of that fact. An example of this is I break a mirror and I have 10 years bad luck. If I have bad luck, I mean, something happens to me, I get into a car accident or I lose my job, I'm going to go back and say, yep, that mirror broke. That's why I have all this bad luck. This is, again, a fallacy of causation. It assigns the reason for my bad luck to the breaking of the mirror, but there really is no way possible we could prove that. I washed my car this morning. It rained this afternoon. Why did it rain? Because I washed my car. Again, illogical connection here. No connection between those. So logical fallacies are, again, on the surface, they seem logical. It's tempting to think a superstition. You know, we have this conversation in my face-to-face class. People talk about when they get ready to watch a Blazers game, they have to sit in the same place in their sofa. They have to eat the same food. They have to wear the same, you know, socks that they were wearing the last time the Blazers played, or the Blazers will lose. Okay, so that's textbook post hoc fallacy. Let's look at a couple of examples. Here's one. We hear a lot of people who have wanted to make the connection between vaccines and autism. After my son had his vaccine, he developed autism. Therefore, the vaccine caused autism. We have study after study after study that says there is no clear connection between autism and vaccines. But this perpetuates all the time. This is one of those post hoc fallacies that people actually believe, and it's a dangerous precedent to set. People on Facebook, now that we're heading toward the end of the pandemic and there's a vaccine on the horizon, who will say, I'm not going to take that vaccine because I don't want autism, because they're buying into this sort of anti-vaccine sort of mentality. Here's one. God is angry at homosexuality, abortion, and Democrats, and as a result, he sent hurricanes, earthquakes, floods. So when there's a hurricane that happens, when there's a flood that happens, there are a lot of people, particularly televangelists. Pat Robertson has gotten into a lot of hot water because he blamed Katrina on the Supreme Court allowing marriage equality, gay marriage. There are other people who've talked about the little polar vortex that happened in New York a couple years ago. That was because we were still allowing abortion on demand. So again, post hoc fallacies. You can say that the reason these things happen is because God has anger. The difficulty here is proving causation, right? So you have to make sure that if you're going to engage in this kind of argumentation, that you have a clear example of the cause. You can't just put one action in front of another and say that one caused the other. Slippery slope fallacy. What the slippery slope fallacy is we make the claim here that if we take a small step, then that's going to trigger a chain of events which is going to lead us to some sort of negative outcome, typically, death and destruction. So it's a faulty argument by cause. It assumes that taking that small step will necessarily lead us to the negative outcome. And I give you a couple of kind of generalized examples here. The first is Bob that asserts that if we allow same-sex couples to marry, then the next thing we know, we'll be allowing people to marry their parents, their cars, and then even monkeys. And again, this assumes that the act of legalizing marriage between two men or two women necessarily will lead to marriage between humans and monkeys and cars. And again, it's a fallacy of causation. In fact, we've had marriage equality now for the better part of 5 or 6 years, and those things haven't happened. A second example, Mom asserts that if her daughter doesn't study, she won't graduate with honors, and that'll make it impossible to get into a top university, which means you won't get a good job and she'll end up flipping burgers. I mean, this argument gets made all the time. The slippery slope argument that basically if you don't get that into that top university, the only logical outcome there is you're going to flip burgers. Again, we know that to not be true, but it's a powerful slippery slope argument. Let me show you a couple of examples that sort of illustrate this. This was a commercial that was out from DirecTV a few years ago, and I think it illustrates beautifully the power of the slippery slope.
When your cable company keeps you on hold, you get angry. When you get angry, you go blow off steam. When you go blow off steam, accidents happen. When accidents happen, you get an eye patch. When you get an eye patch, people think you're tough. When people think you're tough, people want to see how tough. And when people want to see how tough, you wake up in a roadside ditch. Don't wake up in a roadside ditch. Get rid of cable and upgrade to DirecTV. Call 1-800-DirecTV.
So what I love about that is it takes this whole idea of the slippery slope and kind of takes it into a completely different level. So slippery slope. Let's talk about red herring. Red herring, and if you read the textbook, you know that the red herring fallacy comes from the fox hunts that used to happen in Great Britain. And what they would do is they'd have a fox that would be released, and every contestant would have a team of dogs, and they would pick up the scent of the fox and try to chase it, catch it, and win. And what you would do is if your team of dogs caught the scent of the fox, you would take an old dead red herring, a fish, drag it across the trail, throw it off into the woods. So the next team of dogs who was on the scent of the fox, it would stop where the red herring scent picked up and follow the red herring scent off into the woods, and voila, you would win the fox hunt. So this is a fallacy of an argument by deduction, and it's a fallacy of distraction. Couple of examples of this. For example, we can't worry about the environment. We're in the middle of a pandemic. One doesn't have to do with the other, but it's a deflection. Hey, we can't worry about the environment now. We got a pandemic to worry about, which assumes that we can't, walk and chew gum at the same time. Or a politician who says, we can talk about my alleged affairs all day, but what the voters really want to know is when politicians will start working together. So again, it's a deflection. It's pay no attention to this issue that's here. The real issue is, the one that I'm pointing you toward. Let me give you an example of this. And this goes back to the Clinton administration. What's interesting about this particular incident is that there was the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Bill Clinton had been caught having sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky in the Oval Office. He was accused of this, lied under oath about it. So they found out that he had lied and decided that they would start impeachment proceedings, not because he'd had sex with Monica Lewinsky, but because he'd lied about it under oath. And so what had happened was he was being tried in the House, and they were having testimony. And in August, Monica Lewinsky was scheduled to appear before a grand jury to give her testimony. And this was huge news. I mean, Monica Lewinsky, the woman that he was accused of having sex with in the Oval Office, was going to testify. This was going to be a huge blow to the Clinton administration. On the very day that Monica Lewinsky was going to testify in front of the grand jury, the Clinton administration announced that they had dropped some bombs on a pharmaceutical factory in Sudan. And what they had argued was that they found out that this was going to be a meeting place of leaders of Al-Qaeda, and this was the perfect time for them to wipe out the leaders of Al-Qaeda. So we woke up the morning that Monica Lewinsky was going to testify to the grand jury to the news that we had just preemptively bombed an independent country. And so suddenly all the attention went away from Monica Lewinsky testifying to the grand jury to, are we going to go to war and why did we drop these bombs? The interesting thing was that 6 months prior to this incident with Clinton, a movie had come out called Wag the Dog. And what Wag the Dog was about was a president who was caught making advances on an underage girl in the Oval Office. This was 2 weeks before the election. And so what had happened was he said, I'm never going to win election if I have the sex scandal. So he hired a director, big spin doctor, and he decided he would create a fictional war with Albania, hoping the media would concentrate on the war instead of the sex scandal. And it worked, and he got reelected. 6 months later, when Bill Clinton bombed an aspirin factory in the middle of the impeachment trial, everybody said, whoa, this is, Clinton's Wag the Dog. Here's the kind of the coda to all of this, and that is, at the end of the day, what they found in the pharmaceutical factory, or colloquially an aspirin factory, was not Al-Qaeda leaders, but aspirin, pharmaceuticals. In fact, this pharmaceutical company was the only pharmaceutical plant that was producing malaria drugs, and we bombed it. We took it out. We literally eliminated the only factory creating malaria drugs for the Middle East. So it was really a backfire on the Clinton administration, but a textbook example of, this idea of the red herring. So, all right, let's look at appeal to tradition. Appeal to tradition is a faulty argument by authority. It says that tradition is the authority here, and we cannot, ignore it. We cannot downplay it. It plays on pathos as well to support a claim. So it plays on a value of some sort to say, we can't change this. The value of this thing is so important. Let me give you a couple of examples. One is, traditionally, marriage has always been restricted to heterosexual couples, so expanding marriage to include homosexual couples is wrong. This was the argument that got made when we were debating marriage equality, gay marriage, 10, 15 years ago. Again, argument, and even use the term traditional marriage. So this idea of appeal to tradition. A lot of people would make this argument. We've never had a woman president before, so why would we start now as a reason to vote against Hillary Clinton or as a reason not to nominate a woman for president again? Both arguments that are based solely on tradition, not any sort of evidence or logic or any of those things. Let's take a look at a couple of examples. Advertising. This is a great place for this. Here is a type of cereal called Ancient Grains. And the argument here about appeal to tradition is anything old must be good. Like, if we can go back to the good old days, in this case, ancient times where they ate, they didn't eat processed foods and they didn't eat, fast food and all the crap that we're putting in our bodies. So if people see, oh, this is ancient grains, this must be stuff that isn't polluted with all of the, chemicals and stuff that we have today. And it's, who knows what's in this cereal, but all you got to do is slap the word ancient on it, and it suddenly takes on this idea of tradition. So I thought this was a great example of appeal to tradition. Here's another really good example of kind of the value-laden approach. Back right after 2011, September 11, The United States was in just this huge fervor of patriotism. We'd had the Twin Towers had been bombed. It put us all on notice. For a while, everybody had American flags on their cars. The real kind of attitude in our country was we're no longer black Americans, white Americans, Democrats, Republicans, Michiganders, Georgians. We're all Americans. We're all into this together. And it was a real kind of this patriotic fervor that was growing. But one of the backlashes against this was a lot of companies who were selling products started jumping on this bandwagon. In other words, and here's a great example of GM. GM put out this campaign saying, keep America rolling. We're going to offer 0% financing on a car. So, but a lot of people looked at this and said, well, what's the message here? Don't let the terrorists win. Buy a car from us. I mean, even though you're giving 0% interest, they're still profiting off of the sale of that car. And so what a lot of people looked at this and said is this sort of false patriotism. And other companies fell in line. They said, look, come to our mattress store and buy a new mattress at 25% off, keep America rolling, keep America working, keep America growing. So this is a type of appeal to tradition. You're appealing to that sort of value, that value being patriotism in this case. So, okay, here's another one. It's called the false dilemma. It is really a fallacy of either or if then. It makes the argument that there is only a choice only between two options. You either do this or you do this. You either do A or you do B. And typically, A is something we absolutely don't want, so we're stuck with B. It's kind of a forced choice in some cases. In some cases, A and B are both equally bad, and so we kind of have to hold our nose and choose one. I'll give you a good example of this, and it ignores the additional options, by the way. So the first example I'll give you is that when we go to vote for president, we only have two options for president, we're told, Democrat or Republican. And in the 2016 election, we had the choice between Hillary Clinton, a very polarizing candidate for the Democrats, and Donald Trump, a very polarizing candidate for the Republicans. And there were a lot of Republicans who said, I don't like Donald Trump, but I sure don't want to vote for Hillary Clinton. I don't like her. I'm stuck. So they didn't vote at all because they said, I've only got two choices. And there are a lot of Democrats who said, I'm a Democrat, but I can't stand Hillary Clinton, but there's no way I'm going to vote for Donald Trump, so they voted for no one. And a lot of the third-party candidates, Jill Stein was a great example of this, where the people out there saying, wait a minute, you've got other options. But the way our system is set up is we only focus on the Democrat or the Republican. We make the argument that the only two viable candidates are Republican and Democrat. We won't let third-party candidates join in the debates. They don't get as much airtime because they can't raise enough money. So I think it's a textbook example of the false dilemma. We shouldn't be forced to pick between a Republican and a Democrat. We should understand that there are candidates in the middle. We always hear this too, you're either with us or against us. Well, I can be with you but not quite in line with all of your policies, or I can be against you but still agree with some of the things, that you're for, but it isn't all or nothing. You can't put people in that kind of position where you say, hey, you're either with everything we're doing or you're completely against us. Let's look at a couple of other examples. I love this kind of meme that's out there. It's before you judge me, make sure that you're perfect. In other words, the argument here is you either have to be perfect or you can't judge me. There's no in between. Like you have no right to judge me unless you're completely perfect yourself, which is completely illogical. There are people, no one's perfect, so does that mean no one can judge, right? So I like this idea that there are no alternatives in the middle. Here's a good example. When George W. Bush, right after 9/11, George W. Bush had made the decision that 9/11 was probably the result of Saddam Hussein being involved, and that Saddam Hussein likely had weapons of mass destruction. And so we went to the United Nations Security Council because we decided we're going to go and take out Saddam Hussein. And we asked the Security Council for permission, and they said no. We were vetoed. France was one of the two countries that vetoed that policy, and all it takes is one vote to veto. And what had happened was we became incensed over France, and we decided, how dare France tell us we can't go take out Saddam Hussein? And so we went through this whole period where we wouldn't call them French fries, we had to call them freedom fries, and French toast was freedom toast because we hated the French. Anyway, we went to the UN National Security Council to get permission to form a coalition to go and take out Saddam Hussein, and they turned us down. So we decided to go on our own. And the United States was not very supportive of this. American people were not very supportive until George W. Bush made the argument that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. Either we take those weapons of mass destruction away from him, or we are all going to be, they're all aimed at us. In other words, he made the argument, he was so terrible, he was as worse than Hitler, that if he has these weapons of mass destruction, they're aimed at us. We don't want to die. We don't want those weapons of mass destruction aimed at us, so we have to take them out. The either or, the false dilemma. Because what it ignored is we could do more sanctions, we could go in with more inspectors, we could do diplomatic efforts, we could go back to the UN Security Council and try to get permission from them so that it was an international coalition versus just the United States going in. So this became a real conundrum for people in that they were told, we've got two choices. We either go on our own and take out Saddam Hussein, or he's going to take us out. In the end, what we learned was we have no evidence that he ever had weapons of mass destruction. So, all right, so the false dilemma. False authority. False authority is when we assign credibility to an argument because the person making it is perceived to be an authority. Even if they're not, we hold them up as an authority. A great example of this are celebrities, what I like to call the myth of celebrity. We put our celebrities and athletes on pedestals, and we decide that if an athlete or a celebrity likes a product or endorses a product, it must be good. For example, a commercial claims that a specific brand of cereal is the best way to start the day because athlete Michael Jordan says that that's what he eats for breakfast every day. You know, so, I mean, just because Michael Jordan eats it doesn't mean that's the reason he's a great athlete. But we decide that because Michael Jordan eats it, he has authority on the basketball court. He must also have authority over, you know, cereal. Another, we hear this from mom all the time, because I said so. You know, mom gets to say, I'm the ultimate authority here. It doesn't matter whether I'm right or wrong. I have authority. So false authority is one of those examples of how we can have illogical arguments. Just because you quote an authority or you quote a celebrity or quote a famous person doesn't necessarily mean it's an accurate argument. Let me give you a couple of examples. Here's one. I love this. Is sort of a meme that's out there. Abraham Lincoln said, "Don't believe everything you read on the internet just because there's a picture with a quote next to it." And I think what he, you know, clearly Abraham Lincoln didn't say this, but the argument is we look at this and say, "Oh, wow, Abraham Lincoln was pretty, you know, fortuitous about the internet, right?" So we'll believe anything if there's a famous person next to it, or a respected politician, or a respected athlete. So we have to learn. We have to learn to say, you know, gosh, I'm gonna, you know, consider who the authority is. Here's another. This is a famous commercial from the 1980s, and we'll talk about this on the at the end of it.
I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV. And if your child had a cough, she'd get just what the doctor orders. But for your cough, you play doctor at home, even trying medicine you originally bought for your child. You need one of the adult formulas from Vicks. For the coughs adults get, with the strength adults need. Formula 44 for coughs, 44D for coughs with congestion, and 44M for coughs with congestion and a raw, irritated throat. The adult formulas. You can't buy anything more effective.
The adult formulas from Vicks, of course.
So what I love about this is you have an actor who says, I play a doctor on television, and then he proceeds to recommend this, you know, medication in a very serious tone. I mean, you sort of forget by the end of the commercial that he's not a real doctor, right? And this is one of the most egregious examples of sort of what we call the myth of celebrity. Speaking of, one last example I'll give you, and this is goes back to Monica Lewinsky, who happened to have sex with Bill Clinton in the Oval Office. Quite a few years after that happened, Jenny Craig, weight loss product corporation, decided that they were losing ground compared to Weight Watchers and Nutrisystem and all of these other weight loss products, and decided they wanted to hire a spokesperson to kind of reinvigorate the brand. And they decided that they would hire Monica Lewinsky to be their new spokesperson. So they did a commercial with her, signed her to a $1 million contract. She did this commercial saying, "Hey, I'm Monica Lewinsky. I've been on Jenny Craig for a couple of months. I've lost some weight, and follow me on my journey." That commercial aired for about a week to huge backlash because people said, wait a minute, at the point where we've taken Monica Lewinsky and treated her as an authority on weight loss simply because she's famous, and she's famous because she had oral sex with the president, we've taken the myth of celebrity to this outrageous degree. So, okay. Next. Is the bandwagon. This is our fallacy in which we say that the more people who are for something, the more accurate and true it must be. It's a faulty argument by authority. We decide that the more people like something, that must be the authority. The Latin version of this is ad populum, which is Latin for to the people, which means the majority is always right. A couple of examples. A child says, "But Dad, everyone's doing it." We decide that if everyone's doing it, it must be right. It must be true. Or a politician says, "The polls have me at 51%, so I'm going to win this election." We know that polls are just a sample size, but people will take polls and make the argument that if there's a majority in this poll, then that necessarily means that there is authority. Let me give another couple of examples here, and most of these come from sort of commercials. Here's a great example of toothpaste that says 9 out of 10 dentists can't be wrong. You would think in this case that 9/10 of all dentists in this entire country support this toothpaste. Yet what we don't know is how many dentists. This could literally be only 10 dentists that were interviewed for this this ad, and 9 of them said, "Sure, this toothpaste looks great." We create this sense of a bandwagon. I hope this is gluten-free. Don't even know what that means, but it seems to be the trend these days. We look at trends and we think, well, it's the trend. Everybody's going gluten-free. I might as well try it. It must be the right thing to do if everybody's doing it. These bandwagon fallacies are so ubiquitous. They're out there. I mean, every time we turn on television, we see poll numbers. Every time we see commercials, we see 4 out of 5 dentists, or we see this, that, or the other. So be careful of bandwagon. Ad hominem. The ad hominem attack is Latin for to the person. It attacks the person, not the idea. This is very common in political speeches. People will attack their opponent, bring things up about their opponent. For example, a Democrat might say, "I can't support his proposal since Senator Smith is a Republican." The argument is his policy or his proposal is bad simply because he's a Republican, not because the policy itself is bad, but the fact that he's a Republican. We see this in politics all the time. A Republican won't vote for a bill that's in Congress if it was proposed by a Democrat. President Trump complains all the time that the reason he gets such bad publicity is not because he's a bad president, it's because he is a Republican. There's another example here. "You wouldn't understand since you've never been homeless." It makes the argument that you can never help us, or you can never have empathy for me because you've never been homeless. It attacks the person because of their lack of experience, which is completely untrue. People can be empathetic toward the homeless even if they've never been homeless, but it becomes an ad hominem attack. Again, let me give you a couple of examples. If you know anything about Ted Kaczynski, he's the Unabomber. He was convicted about 10 or 15 years ago. He'd sent a bunch of brown paper packages through the mail, and several people were killed. A few people had their hands blown off. He had isolated himself in the woods, but he terrorized. He sent these manifestos to the press. So the argument here is, if Ted Kaczynski believes in global warming and you believe in global warming, you must be a lot like Ted Kaczynski. So they're attacking their sort of credibility. You're believing in a theory that Ted Kaczynski, a mass murderer, believes in. So I like this idea of this sort of ad hominem attack that basically kind of looks at this and says, I'm gonna reduce your opinion down to the lowest common denominator and then dismiss it. This was another one that came up a lot. When Barack Obama ran for president, there was a big to-do about his last name. It sounded a lot like Osama bin Laden, and his middle name, Hussein, Barack Hussein Obama. So people put a lot of emphasis on Hussein when they talked about him. A lot of his opponents would never refer to him as Barack Obama. They would always refer to him as Barack Hussein Obama. And so this was one of the ads that came out. It said the only difference between Obama and Osama is BS. In other words, linking him to Osama bin Laden was a way of destroying his own credibility. Not whether he was, qualified to be president or not, but look, he has a name that sounds a lot like Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein. We can't possibly elect him. So, okay. So those are the 10 fallacies. And I know on the exam there are going to be a bunch of examples of fallacies, and you're going to have to try to determine which one is which. So I have a bunch of different examples here of fallacies that I thought I would share with you. So I'm going to show you the slide. You can pause it if you want and think about it and then decide what you think the fallacy is and then put it back on play and I'll tell you, or you can just follow along as I go through them. The first one is a man holding a sign, protect children, not guns. What do you think? The answer to this is false dilemma. It suggests we have two choices. We can either protect children or you can own guns, but there's no in between. I don't see any reason to wear a helmet when I ride a bike. Everyone bikes without a helmet. What do you think? This is bandwagon. Again, everybody's doing it. Must be the right thing to do. USA, love it or leave it. We had this discussion earlier. This is either or. Okay. It's ridiculous to worry about protecting America's national parks against pollution and overuse when innocent people are being killed by terrorists. What do you think? This is red herring. Pay no attention to this issue here. The real issue is innocent people being killed by terrorists. More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. This is an ad, literally an ad from the 1950s. What do you think this is? Yeah, false authority. Just, if a doctor smokes, well, it must be healthy. There must be nothing wrong with it. There can be no doubt that the Great Depression was caused by Herbert Hoover. He became president in March 1929, and the stock market crashed just 7 months later. What do you think? Post hoc ergo propter hoc. Just because he became president, because the Depression happened after he became president, doesn't mean that he caused it. Woman running for county commissioner in, I don't remember where this was, but they defaced the billboard, changed her from Georgia Hiller to Georgia Hitler, and then drew a Hitler mustache on her. So what do you think this is? This is ad hominem. Again, attack the person, not the idea. If we allow the school board to spend money remodeling the gymnasium, next they'll want to build a new school, give all the teachers a huge raise, taxes will soar so high that businesses will leave, and then there will be no jobs for anyone in this town. What do you think? Slippery slope, the domino effect, dominoes tipping over. This was an actual cover from The Nation. Vote for Bush or die. What do you think? False dilemma, either or. I didn't vote for Bush. I'm still alive. So clearly a fallacy. Raising a child is just like owning and raising a pet. You need to feed it, play with it, and everything will be fine. What do you think? False analogy. Raising kids are not the same as raising a pet. Attention, lunatic atheists and their lawyers. Anti-God is anti-American. Anti-American is treason. Traitors lead to civil war. What do you think? Slippery slope. Okay, so you've got, if you're anti-God, you must then be anti-American. If you're anti-American, that means you're treasonous. If you're a treason, this is leading to civil war. So if we take God out of everything, we're going to end up in a civil war. I can't support Representative Fry's proposal for campaign finance reform. After all, he was kicked out of law school for cheating on an exam. What do you think? Ad hominem. Again, attack the person, not the idea. Ohio GOP leader blasted for calling wildfires God's punishment to liberal California. Literally said that the wildfires that were occurring in California was punishment from God for being so liberal. What do you think? Post hoc, ergo propter hoc. Just because the fires happened after some sort of liberal policies were put into place doesn't mean they were caused by the anger of God. One non-smoker interviewed at a restaurant said, I can eat dinner just fine even though people around me are smoking. Another, responding to an LA Times survey, said, I don't see what all the fuss is about. My wife has smoked for years and it's never bothered me. We can see then that secondhand smoke does not cause a problem for most non-smokers. What do you think this is? This is hasty generalization. This is stringing together three examples and arguing that this is representative of all non-smokers, which we know is not true. If you owned a bakery, would you want to be forced to make a Nazi cake? What do you think? I think this is slippery slope. What this argues is if you allow yourself to make a cake for same-sex couples, and this is what this really comes out of, is these cases where bakeries have refused to make wedding cakes for same-sex couples. The argument here is if you have to be forced to make a cake for a same-sex couple, you must also be forced to make a cake with a Nazi symbol on it, and who knows what else, celebrating the devil, whatever. I also think this could be false dilemma. You know, you either have to agree to make a cake for same-sex couples, or you can either resist making a cake for same-sex couples, or you're going to be forced to bake a cake with a Nazi symbol on it, with a swastika on it. So you've got no other option. Okay. Our school must either increase tuition or cut back on library services for students. What do you think this is? Yeah, either or, false dilemma. There are probably other options in the middle. If you wouldn't eat your cat, why eat a turkey? This is from a PETA ad. What do you think this is? Yeah, false analogy. You know, turkeys are, domesticated poultry, or poultry that's been, raised for food. Cats are not typically food. When we do this, we're using some emotional appeals to make that analogy seem more cogent. So, okay, so that's our lecture on fallacies, and I think this is a really good option for you to come back to if you're writing your own speeches and thinking, do I have any fallacies in my speech? Make sure when you're watching commercials, when you're listening to political ads, these fallacies come up all the time. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it works for you. And until the next video, thanks for watching.